Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
It is that time of year again, the time when students are starting to get ready to go back to school. For many colleges, students are already starting to go back, for many in the virtual setting, and we're seeing what's happening as certain campuses are trying to safely reopen and then seeing little spikes in terms of COVID outbreaks. So this can bring about a lot of stress for many students. So I wanted to kind of focus in on college age students and students that are going to be maybe virtually learning now, and perhaps this is something new for them. Maybe this is going to be something that fits better to their learning style. But I want to talk about some things that you can be doing to really optimize the health of the brain during this time of change and this time of stress. So I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and one area that I really like to focus on during that back to school time of year is to look at phosphatidylserine. Phosphatidylserine is essential when it comes to helping the brain and the neurons in the brain to really support memory function, as well as something known as neuroplasticity, which is really quite unique. So what neuroplasticity is the capacity for the brain to basically kind of go in and clean up any damage that may have occurred. And how can we get damage? And we're thinking brain damage, but we're talking at minor levels. So oxidative stress, inflammation, things that can be brought upon because of poor diet, because of, not having the right exercise routine. There's a lot of different things that can really impact inadequate sleep. There's another great example of what can create harmful effects within the brain. So neuroplasticity, it's so cool the way that this works. So it's this capacity to replace damaged neurons and to make new ones. We know that phosphatidylserine plays this really essential role in this. So what exactly is phosphatidylserine, and why is it very beneficial for students who are going back to school, whether that be on campus, whether that be virtual learning? Let's talk a little bit about this. Well, what we know is phosphatidylserine is the major phospholipid class in the brain. So it basically is surrounding the inner portion of the membrane of all of the neural tissues, which is key because when we think about our brain, you have to understand that it's composed of all of these different fats. So we have things like omega-3 fatty acids, we have vitamin D, so those fat-soluble vitamins play a crucial role. But we also have to look at the phospholipids, and the major phospholipid that we generally hone in on is phosphatidylserine. So phosphatidylserine is our friend. The problem is that sometimes under times of stress, the body doesn't have enough innate ability to go ahead and utilize its phosphatidylserine stores. And so this can impair our ability to focus, our ability to retain new information. So even when we're looking at aspects of memory, so short-term memory, long-term memory, when the body is under stress. And for many college students, going to school in this virtual environment may drive up more stress, especially for maybe freshmen college students, where this is supposed to be the time of your life and that experience of going off and maybe living on campus and having that full college experience. And perhaps this is going to be more different than what you were expecting. And maybe you had these expectations and now you're kind of stressed out about that. Well, we have to make sure that we are taking care of our brain. And this isn't something that we just think about as we get older. Oh, let's think about brain health when we get into our 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, this is something that we want to think about even when we are in our 20s. We want to understand how it is that phosphatidylserine is actually working to enhance all aspects. And we can get phosphatidylserine from dietary intake. However, the issue generally comes down to most people follow a standard American diet. So intake of serine, which is the main amino acid, and that then transfers, it adds this phospho group to it. We usually are just not getting a high enough exposure. So the brain's demand for serine becomes more critical with the aging process because our natural production and exposure is usually much reduced through the aging process. But we also know that there are so many other things that are impacting our phosphatidylserine status in the brain. So stress is a huge one. And for a lot of people who maybe experience issues with attention problems, maybe you're sitting there in a class and you're trying to pay attention, you find yourself off in your own world thinking about other things. For people who maybe have a diagnosis of attention deficit, this can certainly be problematic. So now we have to add in the world in which we're living in now, where we are still dealing with the pandemic and all of the different alterations to our normal social environments, which can once again heighten the stress level and have an impact in terms of the adrenal glands and that stress response. When you think about cortisol release, well, this is one of the ways in which phosphatidylserine has actually been looked at. And there are so many different studies that have really honed in on how phosphatidylserine and the human brain, this interconnection, this key fat that helps to protect the brain cells. So in the Journal of Nutrition, they were looking at a study to assess all of these different roles and the importance of phosphatidylserine as this endogenous phospholipid, as well as it being a dietary nutrient. So looking at the supplementation of it as well. So they were looking at the biochemistry within the brain, looking at the physiology, the actual functionality of what is occurring. And they looked at over 127 different published research studies and looking at this huge body of scientific evidence in terms of that interaction of phosphatidylserine when it came to cognitive activity, when it came to retention of cognitive functioning ability. And this is an area that I find such really interest in, because when we understand the human brain and we understand what we're lacking and we try to replenish, this is even like we can look at vitamin D. There are pediatric studies where they've been able to link low levels of vitamin D, deficient levels of vitamin D, with the severity of attention issues in young children or even in that autism spectrum. And that's a key fat for the brain. So we know that phosphatidylserine is really playing this important and essential role. They actually gave phosphatidylserine in the setting of people who were exercising. Say, okay, we know if we have someone do high endurance exercise, this will stimulate a high stress internal environment. So let's see if the phosphatidylserine can help in any way. So they took a group of healthy subjects and they gave them phosphatidylserine every single day for 10 days. Now, this was a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, so keep in mind some of the people were receiving phosphatidylserine, the other group was receiving a placebo, and they were looking at their peak cortisol concentrations under these times of stress. And they were looking at even other hormones. They were looking at testosterone levels. And they wanted to see, how was it that phosphatidylserine, this naturally occurring phospholipid, how was this working to really support the body's way of recognizing, detecting, and managing stress? So I think that this is really such a fascinating study. And then they went and they replicated a study in the setting of college students. So they took a group of college students who were certainly under a significant amount of stress. So they took the students and they said, okay, let's give them some phosphatidylserine. Once again, we're doing this double-blind placebo-controlled trial. And they wanted to see, would this help these college students in terms of improving their explicit memory? Would this help them in terms of learning tasks? Would this help them in terms of their focus? And would this help, say, if they were delaying that absorption of new material? So say you're sitting there in a class and you're learning this information, but you feel like it's not really soaking in. So they said, let's try this and let's see how this works. And for students who were going and taking exams and had higher levels of stress and dealing with that cortisol stress response, once again, they were able to see how phosphatidylserine really was working in terms of this highly supportive role in terms of that management. So for me, I thought, it is that time of year. This is when people are going back to school. And maybe you are doing virtual learning, but you still want to make sure that you're doing everything to optimize your overall health. And when we recognize that something such as phosphatidylserine can do so much in terms of helping us regulate that cortisol response, we talk oftentimes about adrenal adaptogenic herbs, things like ashwagandha, things such as rhodiola. So in prepping for, and this is great, even not just for college students, but you think about parents that maybe your children are going to be doing more of this distance learning or the virtual learning experience. And this drives up your stress because you're like, oh gosh, now I'm going to be more involved in terms of their day-to-day homework assignments and things along that line. So your stress level may be up much higher. Maybe you're trying to balance out your work schedule with your children's education schedule right now. So this is something I encourage so many people to consider. We used to always recognize phosphatidylserine in that setting of memory for people who were getting older. And they found that once they started to incorporate this wonderful supplement into their routine, that this really helped in terms of that recall of memory, the retention of information, but it's also beneficial for those at a younger age as well. So knowing that this can help to improve different enzymatic activity in the body, helping to support the composition of those neurons. And remembering, one of the main things that it does is when the brain gets too stressed and we start to get this minute damage that occurs, the phosphatidylserine can come back through on that other end and help with that neuroplasticity, that replacing of those damaged areas. So really quite impressive the way that this key essential phospholipid is working in the human body. It's not just within the brain. We understand so much more now. Now, here's something interesting is when we look at things such as phosphatidylserine and phosphatidylcholine, oftentimes in European countries, they prescribe this to people who have mild cognitive impairment or people who have issues with attention deficit, and they give them phosphatidylserine, phosphatidylcholine, the other phospholipid, to help to support those neuronal connections. So there's a lot of information out there that really show why it is that phosphatidylserine is so much more than just for memory. It really plays this role in terms of a proper stress response. When we think about excess stress right now, when we think about how we are perceiving our new normal, one would say, having phosphatidylserine on board can help to support better and more consistent focus, attention, a general sense of well-being, regulating the body's stress response at the same time, helping to nourish the brain. The science really is clear and evident in terms of how effective phosphatidylserine supplementation can be for those who are dealing with a variety of different brain health concerns. When we think about that exercise study where they had healthy subjects and seeing that blunted effect that happened with cortisol, seeing how they were able to endure so much more because of having additional phosphatidylserine on board, understanding how college students had that ability to have more focus and have better retention when given phosphatidylserine. So many different wonderful ways in which you can utilize phosphatidylserine into your daily routine. With all of the different things that people are experiencing now and the changes, we definitely know that stress is going to impact so many of us as the school year begins. And this is why I encourage you, go to the website, invitehealth.com, check out the phosphatidylserine, and I will be with you talking about some more tips on back to school and what you can be doing to make sure that you have your body and your mind ready for the new school year. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.